Overall, well, there's been a lot of good games that have come out this year, such as Resident Evil Village, Nier Replicant, Returnal, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, and even more on the way. Never would I thought in a million years that a parody visual novel of an unreleased indie game would stand out to me the most out of all of the other games that I've played this year. So hey guys, what's up? It's Umbruhh here, and today I want to talk about why that game in particular, Snoot Game, is currently my game of the year. So before we start this, we're gonna have to go back in time a little bit. We're gonna have to flash back to good old June 11th, 2020 at the PlayStation announcement showcase. So in the showcase, Sony officially announces the PlayStation 5 along with some of the games being released on it, such as Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, Horizon Forbidden West, the Demon Souls remake, Kena Bridge of Spirits. However, there were some games that were a lot more on the weird side, and the game that particularly took the cake was Goodbye Volcano High. Okay, well, there's also Bugsnax, which reminded me of the fever dreams I had back when I had the swine flu in 2009, but that's unrelated. And that game actually came out, and apparently it was pretty good. I still need to play it, though. A lot of viewers immediately took the chance to express their distaste for Goodbye Volcano High, expressing their distaste particularly for the art style and how it looks like a scaly Life is Strange or a Night in the Woods wannabe, or how Sony used that game to highlight the power of the PS5. And later, people found out that the lead writer for the game, Katie Gray, posted some Harry Potter NSFW. Yeah, I'm not making that up. Harry Potter NSFW stuff to Kotaku. And along with all of that, everybody on the internet shat on the game. YouTube, Twitter, Reddit, except for one website, 4chan, which is surprising. Well, I mean, they did shit on the game too, because V shits on everything. But there were a group of users on the websites that were interested in the game and its setting, and the protagonist Fang. And those people spent the next year working on a parody of the game called Snoot Game, and those people are called Caveman Anon. And while Snoot Game is technically a parody, calling it a parody seems like a disservice to considering the amount of quality and effort that was put into the game. Apparently it was initially going to be a shitpost, and many people, myself included, were expecting it to be as well. And I remember learning about this game from the time I went on V around early June. Now, normally I tend to stay the hell away from 4chan due to the stuff that comes out of that site. But I was curious to see if there was any leaks about E3 at the time. Then I saw some threads about what I thought was Goodbye Volcano High. Surprised, because that trailer came out a year ago and I thought all of us just forgot about it due to how shitty that trailer looked. But then I learned there was a group of people known as Caveman Anon that made a VN parody called Snoot Game. And knowing 4chan, I was expecting it to be an extremely edgy shitpost, considering where I found it. But when I installed it and played it, I was utterly wrong. And while there is edgy humor in the game, that's not the main premise, and I was just taken aback by how high quality it was and how heartfelt, sincere, and emotional the story was as well. Additionally, the art direction and soundtrack were really well executed, and I absolutely fell in love with the game and its story. So before we get into this part where I'll be talking about why I love this game so much, this part of the video will contain spoilers for all routes of Snoot Game, so please be warned. If you wish to play Snoot Game before hearing these spoilers, I'll include a link to the game on the developer's website, and it's completely free to play as well. So, let's get into this. The first and probably most important reason of why I love Snoot Game is how the characters are written and presented. So, when talking about the characters, let's start off with the protagonist of Snoot Game, Anon. So, Anon starts off as a bit of a loner who simply wishes to breeze through the school year unnoticed. He initially begins the story as a rather antisocial individual who tries to avoid others, But that changes throughout the story as he comes to make new friends and, depending on the player's choices, grows more as a person and becomes more mature, social, and a more compassionate person overall, especially towards Fang. However, we come to learn that there's a good reason that explains why Anon acts the way he does in the beginning. He starts off as a loner who wishes to avoid other people because he had been ruthlessly bullied and harassed for mainly liking anime. Okay, well, maybe it was more due to him photoshopping himself with anime girls, but it got so bad that he had to leave his hometown and start fresh. And he puts up this barrier in front of others, never really talking about himself or his past, or generally avoiding others because he's afraid to repeat the same mistakes again and be tormented, which unfortunately happens to him again when the school finds out why he left his former hometown in the first place when they see the pictures of him with said anime girls, repeating the same struggles he had previously had to go through. But this time, he has people to support him, like Fang. And as somebody who sadly had to go through a lot of bullying in elementary school and high school for my interests, and just in general, I feel like I can see a lot of myself in Anon, and I'm able to relate with the struggles that this character faces on a personal level too. And depending on whether or not you make the right decisions or not, Anon continues to grow further by trying out new things and becoming talented at them, such as in the fourth and best ending of the game, he ends up going to a very nice college and becomes a sound engineer, and he also tries to learn the guitar as well. And going back to the sound engineer, it's a much better and comfy job too, compared to in some of the other endings when he joins the army or the navy. And now, let's talk about probably the most important character of Snoot Game, and the most popular, Fang. Another character I really enjoyed seeing in this game is, of course, Fang. After all, you can't have a Snoot game without Snoot, am I right? I'm sorry. So, at the beginning of the game, Fang and Anon start off to a bit of a rocky start when Anon accidentally misgenders them, and Fang later finds out that Anon attended Fang and their band's concert and ended up laughing at their performance. However, the two start to warm up to each other pretty quickly, and the two become very close friends and even start dating, much to the dismay of their best friend Trish. I'm bad with English, my apologies. And in many different aspects, Fang's very similar to Anon in terms of the barriers they've put up around others and how they present themselves. Although, whereas Anon acts indifferent and aloof as a way to not draw attention to himself due to his previous harassment, Fang puts up a rather aggressive front and pushes others away, including their own family, and how they act in a provocative manner to gain attention due to how alone they feel. Speaking of which, deep down, Fang feels very alone due to how their parents have apparently written them off as a lost cause, and how they pay more attention to Fang's younger brother, Nazer, more. In addition to this, Fang also struggles to figure themselves out, along with their place in the world, and going back to Fang's family issues, they hate themselves for being the reason why Nazer's wings are scarred and deformed, and believes that Nazer hates them because of it, which is why they push him away, while at the same time show a great deal of remorse and guilt for the incidents, and how in their fragile and damaged state, Fang's best friend Trish influenced them into adopting a more angry and edgy front against the world, and these attributes help highlight Fang as a troubled soul who is suffering from a lot of complex struggles and emotions, which I believe many of us can relate to, especially in our younger years, whether we've hurt someone we loved unintentionally, or how we weren't sure of ourselves or who we are, and how we felt like the world was against us at times and found it too hard to bear. I think that Caveman Anon did an incredible job at writing Fang as a believable and highly sympathetic character. Now let's talk about some of the other characters in Snoot Game. So we get to meet a lot of different characters, such as I mentioned, Nazer, Fang's younger brother, and the first friend that Anon has, along with his girlfriend, Naomi, who's the class president and the one responsible for getting Fang and Anon together, albeit in a rather manipulative manner and for selfish reasons. We also get to meet Fang's bandmates, Reed, who is pretty much the textbook definition of a stoner and a bro, except when he isn't, and Trish, the de facto manager of Vroom, I'm just gonna call it Vroom Drama, I think. Fang's best friend and Anon's worst nightmare. And there are some other characters too that are pretty great, including Principal Spears, who is God himself, Rosa, the religious head of the school's gardening club, who befriends Anon and Fang, and my wife, I meant Stella, one of the school's only two weeaboos with a passion for astrology and tarot readings, who at some point gives Anon a reading which can help players indicate which ending they will get. And out of all of the additional characters shown in the game, I think the two that really stood out for me the most are Nazer and Trish. So let's start off with Nazer. What I like about Nazer the most is how his character is presented throughout the story. He's one of the first characters that Anon meets in the game alongside Naomi. And while Naomi is a bit more on the fake and disingenuous side, you can tell that Nazer, although a bit naive at times, is generally a well-meaning person who just wants to do right, especially with his sibling Fang. And we learn further that despite being one of Volcano High's top students, he's under a lot of pressure because of how his parents have more or less given up on Fang and place all of their expectations on him, a position that he just seems to resent, and he wants to help Fang work through their problems as well. And I just generally like how realistic and well-rounded his character feels in terms of this. And then we have Trish, who is what I guess you could consider the main antagonist of Snoot Game. Trish is introduced as Fang's best friend, and more or less the boss of Vroom Drama. And out of all of the other characters in the game, she is the least friendly and most hostile towards Anon, especially as he gets closer to Fang. And while despite being close friends with Fang, she's been shown to be quite controlling and manipulative of them, making the band go with her decisions, which usually conflicts with Fang's desires, most notably forcing Fang to play the bass rather than their preferred instrument, which is a guitar, and influencing Fang into becoming the person they are at the beginning of the game. However, what I like about Trish is how ambiguously Trish is written, in the sense whereas she can be interpreted as somebody who genuinely cares for Fang and she simply wants what she thinks is best for them, although she doesn't realize how much she's pushing them or manipulating them into decisions they may not agree with. Or another way Trish could be interpreted is she knows exactly what she's doing to Fang and manipulates and controls them for her own gain. And both interpretations see Anon as a threat to her relationship with Fang, which is why she acts the way she does towards him, whether it's through verbally berating him or doxing him in front of the school and showing the school the pictures of what caused him to leave Rock Bottom in the first place. And next, let's talk about the story, since the story is also one of the main reasons why I love this game so much. So, as I mentioned, the game puts you in the shoes of Anon, a human teenager who moves to Volcadera Bluffs, if I'm even saying that correctly, during the middle of the school year to start fresh after a disastrous incident from his old high school. Initially, he desires to avoid others during his final year, but that changes when he meets the school's star couple, Naomi and Nazer, who help him get settled in. And later, Nazer convinces Anon to come to a school performance starring his sibling Fang and their band. However, the performance goes south when they are booed off stage, much to the anger of Fang and Principal Spears, who I originally thought was the fucking Emperor of Mankind in disguise because I had no idea what Primal was before Snoot Game. By the way, it's a great show if you love Gendy Tartakovsky's work. And since that we're talking about him, he says probably one of the most important quotes in the game that stays with Anon the entire game. You are not the only person in the world. Since one of the key themes of Snoot Game is empathy, and one of the morals can basically be summed up as getting over yourself. No, seriously, that's one of the ways Caveman Anon describe the story on their website, particularly with Anon's character bio. This quote said by Principal Spears, as I mentioned, is a pretty important quote in the game since Anon steps out of his comfort zone throughout the story and tries to become a more empathetic individual to those around him, and tries to support Fang through their crisis, and eventually Fang warms up to him and shows him empathy as well when Trish showed those embarrassing photos to the school by supporting him and even taking him home and looking after him after he got injured by a student. And depending on the player's choices, Anon can either show a great deal of empathy towards others as well, such as Nazer, Naomi, well, initially, and even Trish in Ending 4 when he saw how lonely and miserable she was at the dance, and despite how horrible Trish was to Anon, he tried to show her kindness and offer her a dance and just bury the hatchet with her overall, mainly for Fang's sake though. But it's really shown how much he can grow throughout the game depending on whether or not the player makes the right choices. And speaking of, I really like how your choices can influence the kind of people Anon and Fang become. In Ending 1, Anon remains the indifferent and uncaring individual that he started off as at the beginning of the game, and Fang's issues just become worse and worse until it leads to a breaking point and involves her the school. You remember that one pic that people were posting of Goodbye Volcano High where Fang... Yeah, that meme's no longer funny now. Going to other endings, in Ending 2, Anon and Fang remain the same indifferent and angry people they started off as, but in this ending, it results in Anon breaking Fang's heart in a drunken stupor, where the two break up and they are just seen as miserable people a couple years after the events, so like during the epilogue of that ending. However, in Ending 3 and Ending 4, Anon ultimately becomes a better person overall, and a more supporting partner to Fang. However, how this is shown is different depending on the ending. So, in Ending 3, Fang is different from Ending 4 Fang, but let me explain it. In Ending 3 Fang, she's supported by Anon, but is in a pretty fragile state to the point where she becomes afraid of Trish and kind of Reed after the incident in the auditorium and becomes very dependent on Anon, refusing to leave his apartment to go to school due to both fear and her dependence on him. By the way, at this point in the video, I'm referring to Fang as she and her, since in Ending 3 and Ending 4, compared to the other two endings, she no longer identifies as non-binary. But when the two are reunited 3 years later, we find out that Fang has given up all of her friendships and her passion for music, as it serves as a painful reminder of what happened to her, and she becomes very dependent on Anon, who manages to support her through her hardships, albeit while becoming an enabler as well. Going back to Fang in Ending 4, who also grows as a person, she no longer feels the need to use certain labels in order to make herself happy, and she manages to fix her relationship with Nazer and bury the hatchet with Trish, which is thanks to Anon helping and supporting her through these issues. And 5 years later, Lucy, no longer using the name Fang, becomes a music teacher at Volcano High and reunites with Anon. And what I love about this route is how fleshed out it is compared to the other routes in terms of content, writing, and just how many characters are developed in this route. And overall, it has a pretty satisfying conclusion. And another thing I want to point out that I find interesting is how it's the only ending in the game to have a white background compared to the other three endings that have a black background, possibly hinting that Ending 4 is the true ending. Another thing I mentioned is the game, while it is presented as an emotional and serious storyline, especially in the later part of the game, there is a good amount of humor in the game too, especially in the first part of the game. While it is a bit on the edgy side, it still can be pretty funny. And I think one of the most hilarious moments in the game is during one of the first conversations with Reed in the cafeteria, when you get into a debate whether or not, if I'm saying this right, Pocky Station or X-Rocks is better. Because, yes, that's what they're called in the Snoot cinematic universe because copyright laws. And he says that Pocky Station exclusives are all movie games, and then he tells you to search up a link, which he manages to say, and if you decide to click that option where you look up the link, the game will literally open up your browser and play the trailer for Goodbye Volcano High. I remember the first time I got to the scene, I was laughing my ass off. Overall, a lot of the game's writing and storyline really resonated with me on a deeply personal level. Speaking of which, I am about to get a little personal here. So, for those of you who don't know, for many years I've been dealing with on and off depression, anxiety, and grief. It started when I was ruthlessly bullied in elementary school by a former close friend of mine, which further led to my peers treating me with indifference or sometimes even partaking in the bullying of me. And that experience left me emotionally and mentally scarred, and I developed trust issues and began to isolate myself from others, which only added further to my depression. And for a while, I did manage to feel better, partly due to taking antidepressants after previously have been denied them, and I started to become more confident and trusting in others again. However, those issues would resurface when my dog passed away in 2016 and similarly was treated poorly in high school. And during my senior year, I started to feel better again, right before I started college. I was faced with the untimely death of my father, and suffering that great of a loss and how his family betrayed me and my brother after it happened, it destroyed me. My trust issues began to relapse, and I began to feel like the whole world was against me, and sometimes I had no hope that things would change for the better, and in regards to how horribly my father's family treated me after I lost him, particularly after I tried to show compassion to some of them and tried to understand where they were coming from and why they were acting the way they did towards me, it really destroyed me, and I began to internalize the belief that empathy, blind empathy, was a weakness, or just empathy in general was a weakness. And it just opens up an opportunity for people to hurt you and take advantage of you. So for a long time I struggled with that depression, loneliness, and issues with trusting others and God knows what else. And because of all of those experiences, I heavily relate to the main character's struggles in Snoot Game, particularly with Anon and Fang, and the main themes of empathy, hope, and growth really touched me. And as a result, it inspired me to become a better person and acknowledge that empathy truly is a strength and a gift rather than a weakness. And it began to inspire me in a couple of different ways to improve myself, such as picking up a new hobby. Such as I'm trying to learn how to play the guitar again, and I've been making an effort to become more social and extroverted, although to be fair, I also have the pandemic to thank for that, which intensified my loneliness too. Note to self, if you're ever feeling lonely, just live through a pandemic. And now that we've got over the characters and the story, let's talk about some of the other things I enjoyed about the game, such as the music and the artwork and more. So let's talk about the art direction first. The art direction is another highlight for this game and one of the reasons why I enjoy it so much. So let's start with the character art first. So I love the art style that the artists, I still can't remember if it's one artist that worked on this or multiple. So the game's characters look far more visually appealing compared to the source material, especially Fang, Nazer, Naomi, and Trish. Seriously, what the fuck is this? Additionally, I really enjoyed that the artists who worked on this game drew multiple different images featuring characters with different poses, emotions, as it really helps to bring the characters' dialogue to life, so to speak, even if it's a visual novel with still images, and it helps better emphasize their emotions through their dialogue. Seriously, they put a lot of work into drawing these characters, especially with Fang, who has 84 different images for her if you decide to look at her image folder in the game folder. And out of all of the characters in Snoot Game, I think both Fang and Trish would probably be the two characters with the most emotive sprites. And additionally, the background images, going back to more of the things with the art direction, really help set the scene. While a lot of them seem to be stock images that have been edited to fit the game's art style through shading or turning some of the people in the background into dinosaurs. It's kind of amusing. I like that they did that. I still think it's done really well and helps capture the setting, and there are some backgrounds that seem to be completely original as well and are very well drawn, such as Fang's house as well as Fang and Anon's bedrooms, the school rooftops, the front of Volcano High, and its flower garden. And now let's talk about the music. The music present in Snoot Game is, in my opinion, one of its highlights as well, especially since music is also a key theme of the game, so naturally it'd have good music. And it would be remiss of me if I didn't start talking about why I liked Snoot Game's music so much without mentioning one of its most universally beloved tracks, Amber Light Brilliance. This song is supposed to be Fang and Anon's song that is present throughout the game, such as the emotional scene on the rooftop where Fang lets out their emotions to him, or when Anon decides to play the guitar for Fang in their room. And there's many different variations of the song too, such as the original song created for the game, a more upbeat version of the song that plays during Fang's performance in Ending 4, a piano version, and a newer version, or I guess the first version was called the beta and this is the final version. And the song brings out a lot of emotions in me too. A bit of nostalgia, happiness, sadness, and serenity. The best way to describe this song is how Anon described it. A lyricless ballad, an instrumental aria. And beyond that, the game's soundtrack is pretty high quality considering the game only being worked on by a handful of people. Just like the arts, the music does a really good job at adding to the atmosphere of certain scenes, whether a scene is supposed to be relaxing, comical, or serious. Some of my favorite additional soundtracks are the following: Beach Chill Out, which plays in the game's main menu, I believe, or it's a different variation of the main menu theme. Monochromatic Weirdo, which is the first theme that plays when you meet Fang, or when you see Fang for the first time. And this other one called Fuck You, I Like to Shitpost. Yes, that's really the name. Skin Row Soul and Summertime Synth. Overall, the soundtrack for the game is really good, and even if you don't plan on playing the game, I recommend listening to the soundtrack, which you can find on YouTube. Overall, Snoot Game is surprisingly one of the best games that I've got to play this year, and I would absolutely say it's my game of the year as of right now. I went into this expecting a shitpost and ended up with a heartfelt and emotional experience with excellent writing, art direction, music, and humor too. And as somebody who was able to relate to a lot of the game's characters and subject matter on a personal level, it just made the experience all the better. Overall, whether or not you saw the trailer for Goodbye Volcano High and cringed your guts out, believe me, I did. I absolutely recommend giving this game a go, and I will be including a link to both the game's download pages in the descriptions below. They have one on their own website and on itch.io. Additionally, there's supposed to be a 6th update coming out soon, which will fix some things, add new content, and finish up some of the content for the game since the game was rushed to make it in time for E3. And I plan on streaming another playthrough of Snoot Game once Update 6 comes out, so stay tuned. Anyways, guys, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Comment down below whether or not you played Snoot Game yet, and if you did, what were some of the things you liked about it the most. Subscribe for more gaming content. I primarily make Final Fantasy XIV videos, although I love to make other content as well. Follow me on Twitter and Twitch, and I will see you guys later. You guys are the best. Umbruhh, out.